cute thing in the background, so it's fun.
When I was taking for my degree, my mom was actually with her mother and sister, and they compared it with their class or camera. And one for the whole group of my class, but these parents are such oh no, it's like a ways. No, fine. It's always fast. Yeah. It's just awful. Yeah. That's what people say. The president changed it. Yeah. Really? I think if I know if I know what it was before and checked it. What was the one before that? It's in the hour. That's the tower. The chapel. Wait, really? I thought it was that. Oh, that. That was, yeah. That was fun.
Oh, really?
Which
Adamant?
no, I think might be in the Champlain basin in the water, but which I'm probably gonna talk mostly about the basin, anyways, despite the title of this talk.
Okay. We were just there today, and so noticed
Never had been there.
all of the wetland areas.
There's
in
a
that
ton
area.
of wetlands.
Oh, my God. Amazing.
It's
Yeah,
there's a lot of.
You expect to see a few less when you get into higher elevation.
Sure.
And as you're climbing, it was more and more and more instead of.
Yeah.
Then we descended into Adamant.
Yeah. You go high enough and then go down.
Yeah, it's a cool little town.
It is.
Yeah.
Those are still built there now. It's not mine, actually. I wish I could claim that one. Look at the engine who it's from.
It's a testament.
It's the Missisquoi, down pretty close to, relatively close to the road.
Interesting.
It looks like it could be doing it. I'm gonna wait for another minute.
That's fine. I'll talk fast, don't worry.
I don't have a long speaker.
Right.
Come in.
Still grand. Right.
So is the Pringle herbarium open to the public?
I mean, yeah, we don't
Usually, have a standard of the facilities to the public. I think it's all the projected hall, which is the biology. Form and soil science and it's changed. Something else. But I mean, the data center. Tuesday to Thursday is the best day. Running about. Come in. You can walk in. You don't have to be in person. If you want to see the collection, the way to see it is, to get it. Sell in advance. If you like to show you. It is, yeah, in our current layouts changed a little bit over the years. The majority of the collection. Available.
need like one. It's like-
Yeah.
There's not like 100 metal cabinets or something. That's what I'm saying. Super close in. It was founded in the science. But, you know, it was a couple people.
All right.
No.
I think we'll get started. I think we'll get started.
I get a chance.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the second to last talk in UVM's Talks and Walks on the UVM's Wild Side series. This series is a celebration of the 50th anniversary of UVM's natural areas. And I'm going to be saying something that I know many of you know, which is that these talks are paired with walks. I've been on every walk and I recognize many of you, so I know that you know about it. This particular talk on wetlands is paired with a walk to the Karst Wetlands Natural Area, which I have never been to, so I'm super excited to be able to go. That is on Saturday, October 19th at 10 o'clock in the morning. You have to RSVP for the walk, so if you have not done so yet, you need to get online and click the little button.
That's a big
to
chance.
RSVP. Yep. And then just to remind you that the last of the series is about the lake. And so that is going to be a talk by Dr. Mindy Morales on Tuesday, November 12th, again at 5:30 and again here at Echo Center. And that will be paired with a tour of what is right behind us, which is the Rubenstein Ecosystem Laboratory. That will be on Saturday, November 16th, also at 10. And then the pièce de résistance is the 50th anniversary celebration of the natural areas, which is going to be at the Davis Center on the UVM main campus on November 20th at 1 p.m. There's a really, really great lineup. So please check that out. You can also check that out online, same place where you saw this. I am Sarah Helms-Gahan. I am the Associate Vice President for Research. I am here filling in for Josh Benesh, who couldn't be here today, but he is the Director of the UVM Natural Areas. I am also the curator of the Zadok Thompson Zoological Collection, which is the natural history collection for animals that is located on UVM campus. And in collaboration with the Pringle Herbarium and also the Perkins Geology Collections, we make up UVM's Natural History Museum. So I'm super excited to have a speaker today to represent the physical biorepositories that have had a long and productive collaboration with the UVM Natural Areas, documenting the living biodiversity of Vermont. I'd also like to give a special shout out to the other contributors to organizing and putting on this series. The Rubenstein Research Forests, the Rubenstein Ecosystem Science Lab, the Field Naturalist Program, the Consulting Archaeology Program, and UVM's Environmental Program. Yay. So I'm not going to spend more than a minute introducing Dr. Wes Testo. Dr. Testo actually got his PhD right here in Vermont in 2017. I'm working on ferns with arguably the most esteemed fern biologist there is Dr. David Barrington, who many of you may know. He then fledged the nest and went off to a couple of postdoctoral positions at the University of Florida and the University of Gothenburg in Sweden. He then returned to the US to become the curator of ferns at the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago. That's like my dream job.
Especially the fern part.
Right. Okay, maybe not the fern part, but the Field Museum part. And I think probably was for you as well. But Wes's heart was in Vermont. Also on the allure of coming back to become director of the Pringle Herbarium, which was founded in 1902. And is an incredibly active and large herbarium collection, the second largest in New England, only behind Harvard. I asked him for a fun fact, and I was totally expecting a plant fun fact, and what I got was an insect fun fact, which is so awesome for me.
In my audience.
That he is one of the few people who have been stung by not one, but two of the worst stinging insects known, all in a single week.
Get out.
I know, and I knew one of them right away.
I was
I knew one of them right away because I work on ants. I'm like, oh, that's a bullet ant, Paraponera clavata, and it was, but also a tarantula hawk. So after the talk, if you want to mingle and talk with Wes, you can ask him about the experience of being stung. But it all ties back to plants because he was stung by those two insects while searching for ferns. And with that, I will let him talk to you about the wetlands of the Champlain Valley.
Awesome, thank you. Thank you, Sarah, for that very nice introduction. Thank you all for coming. I realize as the season goes on, it gets a little bit colder, a little bit darker, and as at least we're on the inside part, the talks are a little bit easier than the walks when you get into October and November. And several months ago, when we were just kind of coming up with this series of talks, I decided to jump on the opportunity to talk about wetlands of the Champlain Valley, and then decided, as I was starting to put this talk together, that I couldn't decide what I actually wanted to talk about. And that will probably be reflected a little bit in the talk, but I hope it's fun, and I hope we get a little bit of an interesting perspective on at least how I see wetlands in this part of the country. And Sarah did a really nice job of giving us an intro to what we've already done so far over the last few months this summer, and looking forward into the next month or so. We started, for folks that lots of folks went up on Mount Mansfield this summer, right? Wonderful time up there. A little bit nicer than it is now up top, I think. Okay. Maybe it wasn't that nice then either. I was up there very recently. It was beautiful. I picked my days carefully. So we started on Mount Mansfield, right into Alpine Zone, and then worked our way down in through Jericho, right? Talking about carbon cycling of forests, right? The Jericho Research Forest. And more recently, folks were down at Shelburne Pond talking about people and talking about ponds and wetlands there, and you can see that we're slowly moving west, right? And in fact, right here in Burlington, right, in Centennial Woods, we get a little bit of a change of topics, like kind of pathogen ecology and urban ecology a bit. And if you take it all together, today I'm talking about wetlands in the Champlain Basin or Champlain Valley. Define that how you will. And next month we'll be right down here on the lake. I'm actually going to talk a bit about the lake myself today because I couldn't help myself. But all these places, from the top of Mount Mansfield all the way down here, fall into the Champlain Basin. And I'm going to be using quite a few figures actually from the Lake Champlain Basin program, because they have such a nice set of maps of this part of the world. All right. And the Champlain Basin drains about half the state of Vermont. Of course, it's also in New York and a little bit of Quebec, right? So we're talking millions of acres. About half of the state drains into Lake Champlain, and then the other edge that drains out towards the Connecticut for the most part. And within that, there's a lot of water. Right? We know that. There's huge, biggest body of water right behind you all here. And there's also prominent rivers and streams, right? We have the Lamoille, we have the Missisquoi, we have the Winooski River, and then some of these bigger streams, or things that we like to call rivers, like the Platte, big stream really, but or Lewis Creek, right? These are all prominent parts of the landscape here. But if you start to think carefully, some other places that maybe don't look like this, that don't look like the Missisquoi, or don't look like Lake Champlain, are important parts of the hydric landscape, if you will. And if we think about definitions carefully, there's about as many definitions of wetlands as there are wetlands in the world, I think. But the basic idea there is that we're talking about something very sweet out there. We're talking about areas of Earth's surface that are inundated, at least part of these, right? These are your marshes, your swamps, your floodplain forests quite often. We generally set aside lakes and ponds and rivers out of our definition of wetlands. Again, as a botanist, I couldn't help myself with so many wonderful aquatic plants in the state that I'll talk at least a little bit about Lake Champlain. And beyond plants, this part of the state, thinking of Lake Champlain and the wetlands associated, have been really important to people for a very long time. Right? We have a history of human habitation in the area going back several thousand years, about 8,000 years, we think, right? Missisquoi being the center of that in our region. And people have been there ever since. People have used it for hunting, people have used it for fishing, people have used it as homes, for trading, for commerce. We continue to do so. Right? We continue to use the wetlands around us for recreation, for sustenance, and for creating our culture. Right? Much of this part of Vermont has been shaped by wetlands, even in recent history. Right? The history of Burlington, Vermont, it's a history shaped by water, basically. And it still is, right? We think of Lake Champlain, we think of rivers like the Missisquoi, the Lamoille, the Winooski. We also think of places like this. Anyone recognize this? Very good, Bristol. Because you're standing right there with me. My fiance chimed in on that one. Think there. For the botanists in the room, you could pick out Peltandra virginica, which is something in the Jack in the Pulpit family. Very unusual plant in our state, is extremely abundant there. Or if you were standing, this is like right at the fishing access point at Bristol Pond in Bristol. Right, it's a big pond, but a lot of that doesn't really look like a pond, right? A lot of that is a marsh, really. So lots of our wetlands look like that, right? And beyond that, a lot of our wetlands, oh, I jumped too far ahead. A lot of our wetlands are also cut into a complex matrix of marshes, of swamps, of forests, and also of agricultural, right? Especially when we're talking about the Champlain Valley. It's the most forested part of the state, right? There's been really intensive agriculture activity there for a very, very long time, right? And that's a huge part of our state, right? And we wouldn't be here and we wouldn't be living the lifestyle that we live if it wasn't for that agricultural history. So those two realities live side by side. But wetlands like this and wetlands like Lake Champlain, right, are home to some of the richest areas, and speaking about biodiversity in our state, and also home to some of the rare species that we have in the state of Vermont, right? So whether it's a sedge, for some of the botanists in the room, they might fall in love with a plant like that, or a fern. I couldn't help myself, right? That's the Virginia chain fern, one of our rarest plants in the state, really prominent in marshes up in Missisquoi. Or lovable little creatures like spiny softshell turtles or Jefferson salamanders, which rely on wetlands for at least part of their life cycle, right? These areas are cradles of our biological heritage. But it's not just rare species, right? I mean, very common species that are important to many people in this state rely on wetlands in warm weather, right? Whether that's snow geese coming through soon, right? You can go down to Addison and go check them out in another couple weeks. Or northern pike. Do people know where northern pike spawn? One of our most important sport fish and prominent apex predators in Lake Champlain and many, many bodies of water here. They actually spawn in submerged grass at the mouths of most of our rivers and streams. So when it's flooding in early spring here, right, and the rivers are really, really high and they're running through fields of grass or cattails, northern pike, which are big fish, if people know them, I'm a fisherman, I really love these things. They can get like 4 feet long. Will swim up into that grass and lay there. Right? They spend the rest of the year out in our ponds and lakes, but for part of the year, they're practically terrestrial. Right? Right. But it's not just pristine landscapes, right? Like I mentioned before, a lot of Western Vermont has been deforested and remains so, right? There's a forest cover map, right? Everything that's green is at least 30% covered forest. It's relatively low covered, right? Those white spots there do not have that level of forest cover. So they're deforested areas, right? Look up here at Burlington, right? We have a lot more cover, believe it or not, than if you go down into Addison County, where, as you know, there's lots of agriculture there. But a lot of our wetlands look like this, right? This is Lewis Creek. This is from flooding earlier this year, I believe that's from. right? And even when it's not flooding, right, that creek cuts through some forests, right, and also cuts through a lot of agricultural lands. We have a very complex matrix of forested habitats, wetlands, and also habitats that have been altered by us, right? And that's the reality that we live in today. And of course, all of those come together with a variety of tensions, right? There's a variety of impacts exacerbated by humans for a variety of reasons. Of course, we all talk about a housing crisis in Vermont. If you look on Craigslist and look at rent prices here, you know that's real. But development, right, which is something that we're kind of loath to do, I think, in the state, of course, does have an impact on wetlands amongst other places, because as any insurer will tell you, a wetland is not a good place to build a house, right? So we will fill them in, make them not wet, so that they're suitable for housing, right? We've seen intense flooding this year, last year. Obviously, floods are an important part of natural cycles here in the state, but they've been excessive in recent years, and we know that they will continue to be so, right? Anyone know where that is? Photo at the top right. The Winooski. Yeah, it's like up at high, yeah. High Bridge, excuse me. Invasive species, which continue to have a marked impact on all sorts of ecosystems here in Vermont, but especially wetlands, it seems. Most prominently, perhaps, are Japanese knotweed, which, if you know any sort of stream or river system in the state, it's probably got a lot of this in there. But you'll see some other invasive species in a bit that maybe aren't quite so big, but certainly not any less serious. And we talked about this agricultural matrix around us, the importance of farming for our way of life. And that, of course, has consequences, right? We talk about a lot of nitrogen runoff, and especially a lot of phosphorus runoff in Lake Champlain. And if you've tried to go swimming in beaches here in the summer, you know it can be tricky, right? They're often closed. So there's this reality of a tension between our needs as people, or at least what we think we need, and these very delicate landscapes, these very delicate wetlands that surround us. And I think how you think about these tensions depends a lot on your perspective, right? When I was a little kid, I wanted to become an ichthyologist. I wanted to study fish because all I did was fish with all my free time. I still fish with all my free time, but there were no openings in an ichthyology program, so here I am. How it works. And but I'm a botanist, right? So I study plants, and as Sarah very nicely mentioned, the director of the Pringle Herbarium, right, which is this biodiversity museum that we have up at UVM, right? We have close to 400,000 dried plant specimens from around the world, but we have the largest collection of plant specimens from Vermont, right, collected in Vermont. And I look at the specimens a lot, right? The physical specimens themselves, and also online records. We have pretty much all of our records publicly available. When we look at those specimens, we have specimens collected just the other day. I collected some, but we have specimens going back to the 1700s, right? And so together, those specimens provide us with a nice mixture of kind of botany and history, two things I'm quite interested in. And they come together in herbaria. They come together in these museums. And I think that gives me an interesting, although perhaps biased, perspective on our wetlands, right? And that's what I'm going to talk about for the rest of the time that we have together here. And for botanists in Vermont, if you want to go somewhere and see lots of plants and see lots of weird plants, where you go a lot of times to wetlands. Right? You go to our bogs, you go to our marshes, you go to our swamps, our floodplain forests. These are places where some of our strangest, most unusual, and most imperiled plants live, right? And they're also places where many of the plants that we've known for a very long time no longer exist. Plants that were collected historically in the state are no longer found in those places, often because the habitats have been converted. Right? And what I'll show, I think, over the next little bit, hopefully, is that looking at these specimens gives you a bit of a unique perspective on all of those stories. Plants that are in the same place where they were 150 years ago, right? Of other plants that weren't here 150 years ago, but are all over the place today. Japanese knotweed, right? Of plants that used to be someplace and aren't there anymore now. And in some cases, because of this glimpse into places and time, locations that don't exist anymore, right? Certainly they're still there on the map, but they've been converted into something that's completely different from what they were. An example of that in a second. So, the first example, and this is the one we like to see, is a plant like this that provides you a bit of a snapshot into history and people, right? So when I look at a specimen like this, right, and this was collected here in Lake Champlain, very southern part of Lake Champlain, in Canada, by Bill Countryman, who's an expert in aquatic plants. More on this particular individual in a bit. I see not just a plant, but we look at this label information here. You don't have to read it. Don't worry about it. It says Lake Champlain at Red Rock Bay. It's not Red Rocks Park. It's further south. And that was in July 1965, right? And there's a specimen that tells you about where a plant was at a certain point in time, but it also gives you a bit of an insight into that person's life, where that person was, right, at that point in time. And you look at enough of these and you get to feel like you know people, right? Including people that, trust me, I did not know Cyrus Pringle was the founder of our herbarium. He died a little bit before I came on the scene, right? But people like Art Gilman, who wrote our Flora of our state, or Peter Zika, who collected something like 5,000 specimens of plants here in Vermont while he was an undergrad. I don't know if he went to class, but he was certainly collecting plants, right? Or Nellie Flynn, who wrote a flora of Burlington and its vicinity, or Frank Seymour wrote Flora of Vermont over a half century ago now. So I kind of see people and plants at the same time. And so in some of these cases, we see the same plant, same place. And this is a local example, right? And this is one in something that, if you're really inventive, you could claim is a wetland. This is Symphyotrichum tradescanthi. Don't worry about that name. It's a little aster that grows in crevices near rocks, amongst other places at Salmon Hole, right at the bridge going from Burlington into Winooski. If you look down there, right below the falls, where the Winooski River goes under that bridge, there's a tiny little plant right there. It's quite rare in the city, right? Now, Nellie Flynn, who was a local botanist, went there in 1899. She collected this plant. She said, aster, it was an aster at this time, and trust me, I've heard from many people thinking that it still should be an aster, and we made a mistake in changing it. Rocks at Winooski Falls, Burlington, right? September 1899. No, it still flowers in September. And when I just started as a graduate student, this is just over 10 years ago, I saw her specimen and said, I want to see this plant. They'd never seen it before. I went down there, there they are. They're all over the place down there, but good luck finding them anywhere else in our immediate vicinity. So that's kind of fun news, right? You go there, plant's exactly where it was 114 years before. Right? And then there's species we've lost, right? And there's quite a few of these. Fortunately, for the most part, these are species that we've lost from the state, but are present and sometimes common in other parts of the world. But that doesn't make the loss any less tragic to us, right? Amororchis rotundifolia. This is a little orchid collected very, very frequently in the late 1900s. Might have contributed to why it's not found anymore, right? And this was last seen in Vermont in 1923. This is a collection of it from 1923 from that same Bristol Pond that I mentioned. The very northern end of Bristol Pond, there's an extensive wetland. It's full of really weird plants. This orchid is quite common there. And then after 1923, no one's ever seen it. All right, so something's gone. We have lots of stories like this. a disproportionate amount of them, I think, are from Bristol Pond. I don't know what happened there. But seriously, there's like numerous plants that are either extremely rare at Bristol Pond or just stop showing. Right. And then we do have cases, of course, of newcomers to the state, right? All of us came to Vermont, or ancestors came to Vermont at some point or another, some more recently than others, right? This is one kind of annoying newcomer. I think this is Butamus umbellus. It's really beautiful plant, has these nice little pink flowers. It was first collected in Vermont in 1928, right? Down in Addison County, showed up on Lake Champlain. It was known in the Montreal area prior to that. Right? This is native to Eurasia, showed up here, right? Similarities with a lot of us, I guess. Now it's widespread in Vermont, especially in the Lake Champlain Basin, a little bit over in the Connecticut River Valley. But wetlands of Western Vermont is where this thing's really doing. Have folks seen this plant? Is anyone familiar with it?
Is this called flowering rush?
Flowering rush, yeah. Little beautiful pink flowers, gorgeous plant, pretty obnoxious. Right? They have these big rhizomes, form large populations sometimes. And can be really difficult to eradicate. Keep an eye out for it. And then the craziest part to me is that, you know, we have some species that we've lost, right? Like that orchid I mentioned from Bristol Pond. But we also just have whole places that are lost to time. And as someone who is very interested in ferns and is very interested in finding places where ferns were known from a century ago, this is one that bothered me for years. And it was only when I finally asked Art Gilman, who knows more about plants in the state than anybody, I found out the story, right? So this is a fern called the Virginia chain fern, Woodwardia virginica or Anchischia virginica. We classified in a different group quite recently. This is a state threatened species, quite uncommon. If you go up to Missisquoi Bay National Wildlife Refuge, there's some quite large populations there, but otherwise it's really hard to find it in Vermont. And I kept finding all of these collections, old collections of these plants, right? By Nellie Flynn and by others, from some place called Woodwardia Bog or Woodwardia Pond. Where is this wetland? Right? And it's like Colchester. This thing is in Colchester. We're totally overlooking it. And then it said 40th and Allen. I said, well, I know where 40th and Allen is, right? A little bit hard to get in 40th and Allen. Probably shouldn't trespass there. But the reality is, Woodwardia Bog or Woodwardia Pond at 40th and Allen doesn't exist anymore. Got filled in a firing range or something, right? For the military base. And that population of this fern was wiped out, right? So some of these components of our landscape are gone, correct? Right? Now, before you get too sad, Woodwardia virginica, the very common fern in many other parts of this range. We're just kind of at the far northern range of it. But don't waste any time looking for Woodwardia bog. And so as a botanist, I'm going to just spend the rest of the talk here talking about a few different plants that live in wetlands and again, lakes a little bit. Sorry, I couldn't help myself. In northwestern Vermont and seeing what they can tell us about wetlands generally. And I'm going to focus on three very handsome plants, I think, that have very different histories in our state and very different relations with the state. And the first one is the one that, frankly, I think is probably the most interesting. And it's something called Trappa nacans. I think is one of the most beautiful plants when it comes to its floral arrangements of anything in the world. Now you will see this common name water chestnut. Anyone ever eat water chestnuts? Very common in Chinese cuisine. This is not it. This is the problem with common names sometimes. Water chestnuts, if you've ever eaten them in like Chinese food, they're kind of crunchy, right? That is actually a sedge. This is a very different thing. This is related to pomegranates and purple loosestrife, which is another annoying invasive species that we have. So this is a native to Eurasia, and it's very interesting. It's an aquatic plant. It floats on the top of the water, They have inflated petioles. The stalk of the leaf is inflated. They float up on the top of the surface, and they're annuals, right? So that plant will germinate and it will die in 1 year. Okay, and they produce these bizarre-looking spiky fruits, which sink down the bottom. And the other common name it gets is water caltrop. Anyone know what a caltrop is? A pretty arcane terminology. It's a weapon of war, which was used to stop cavalry. People would put out metal spikes and throw them on the ground so the horses wouldn't want to step on them. These have fruits that look like these giant spiky fruits. I don't understand why they look like that. They sink down to the bottom of the water. I hope to never step on them. Yeah, no, sorry, go ahead.
Two theories about why they look like that. One is that it makes them catch in
The matrix on the bottom.
the bottom so they don't drift into deep water where they would be
Interesting.
able to surface. The other one is that they get caught in the hooves of deer.
I have heard that one.
So anyway.
I have heard that one. That one
Guesses.
seems
Two
too.
guesses.
I had not heard the first one though. That's really interesting. I hope they don't get stuck in hooves of deer. That seems really painful.
And that would be a way to get spread.
Sure, get it spread around, of course.
Along.
Interesting. They were first introduced, learn something every day. They were first introduced to the US in the late 1800s at Harvard. People thought they were such fun plants because they're really beautiful that they started growing them in all their ponds at Harvard. And actually wrote at the time, someone said, they're spreading quite rapidly. And someone told me they might become a nuisance, but how could such a beautiful plant ever become a nuisance? So they made it to Lake Champlain, probably by the 40s, we think, right? And oh, I do have a photo of the fruits. Look at that. Yeah, right? And there's the plant there. So they float on the surface, but they're actually rooted in the mud. They can have stems that can be 3-4 meters long, right? Rather stout stem for such a small plant, but it runs down. And this is what they can do. Right? This is from Virginia. There's a nice GIF here from the Lake Champlain Basin Program. So an eradication or management program started in the 60s in Vermont. And it was focusing on the southern end of the lake, right? This plant first showed up in the southern portion of the lake where it's very, very narrow, very shallow, very nutrient rich. It's the kind of place where water chestnut does well, right? And I think we have it's 1999, 2009, and 2020 here, if I'm not mistaken. So 1999, right? It was really dense coverage down below Crown Point and got up to about Ferrisburg, right? 2009, they were kind of pushing it down a bit, it was holding at about the same point on the northern end. 2020, you'll see that we have managed to push it way, way down to the bottom in terms of a really dense infestation. But we'll look up top. 2009 shows up in the Missisquoi Bay spots, one up in Quebec, one in northern Vermont. And then by 2020, it's over in New York and various other spots, bays along the west portion of the state. It's also shown up in the Indian Brook Reservoir. What's the name of it? It's been eradicated there. I think like Pops is playing whack-a-mole, basically. These things. And the kind of tragic part of the story to me is I mentioned that guy Bill Countryman who had collected a specimen of this quite early on. He spent a lot of time in the summers. He was faculty at Norwich. And he would spend his summers doing aquatic botany and amongst other things managing this program. And Vermont had it down to about a half acre left in the late 60s. Funny didn't come through one year. And it was all over. Now remember the plan is an annual, right? So the whole process of eradication is actually pretty simple. If you could pull the plants before they set fruit, and you get them all, and you do that for as many years as you need to get past the dormancy of the seeds, which is mostly just a couple years down, right? We're almost there. You know how much it costs the state of Vermont each year? $500,000. Big bucks, right? Right? And the big scheme of things, not that much, but it's not cheap, right? Because this is how you have to do this, right? right? A lot of the process of this is with expensive equipment. You know, if you ever had work done at your house, you know how much it is to like rent big machinery for a day, right? Over and over and over again, because you have to remove tremendous amounts of this stuff. But it's not just big operations. Variety of volunteer groups, individuals actually can make a significant impact on this and have done so, especially in kind of local scales, right? You're really interested in one delta in the lake or one bay, one town, people can make a sizable impact here, right? So what can we learn from the water chestnut? Well, first off, early action is basically always worth it, right? Saving money in the short run generally doesn't work out in the long run, even if that's not necessarily easy to sell at the time. Aquatic invasives are always difficult, right? We know this. If you do any sort of water sport, you know the importance of washing off watercraft and all that, right? It's a big part of the trouble. You can't keep a deer from getting one stuck in its foot and walking over to another pond, though, right? Things spread in water quite easily. And think about it, we're in Lake Champlain. That's not just, right, that's not Bristol Pond. This isn't a body of water that's just within the bounds of Vermont. You have to have interstate and international coordination, which is a unique challenge, but also an opportunity. Right? And also, I think it's important to keep in mind that communities and individuals can make an impact. This is a record on iNaturalist. Anyone ever use iNaturalist here? Very fun program, right? I waste lots of time looking at things there. This is Michael Sundu, close colleague and friend of mine, snapped a photo of this when he was surely playing with his kid at Indian Brook Reservoir. And he saw this thing, which he knew, it's a very, very good botanist, he knew shouldn't be there. He snapped a photo of it, right? Took a couple years, but the state actually responded and eradicated that population from that body of water for now, right? So you can make a difference. All right, for plant number 2, I have to talk about an ongoing source of excitement and confusion in my life, and that is arrowheads, the genus Sagittaria. This is a really prominent and I think very cool group of wetland plants in Vermont. Worldwide, there's about 35 species of Sagittaria. And we have, if you were to read our Gilman's Flora, which was published just under 10 years ago, 5 species in Vermont, right? These are mostly things that grow in marshes at the periphery of lakes or rivers, right? They're super variable in appearance. You can have the exact same species, and you look at this thing when it grows in water that's this deep versus this deep, and they look nothing. Right, I mean, incredibly variable plants. And we basically have one common species, which is called Sagittaria latifolia. And it looks like that, right? Yes.
By one.
We have one species in the state that's much more common than anything.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. So we have yes, species that is common. Right? We have a handful of species that are, you see every now and then there's one you see all. Right? This is very common in many groups of plants or animals, right? If you're a bird or you often know how that is. And they look like that, right? That's where the genus name comes from, is that at least some of the species have leaves that are shaped like arrows, right? Sagittarius, right? And so every time I saw a arrowhead that had a leaf that looked like that was big, it's Sagittaria latifolia. I can identify that thing from 100 feet away. Well, it turns out the story is a bit more complicated than that. And I have stumbled into the, hopefully, end of 125 years of a Vermont Sagittarius saga. Now, I just told you that one species here can be incredibly varied, right? These are 3 different species, Sagittaria, that we may have in the state of Vermont. We're still trying to figure this out. Now, if anyone can tell me the difference between these, I will pay you $2. No, in all seriousness, it's really hard to tell these. I promise you, these are 3 different species. And the main note is you say, oh, this one has leaves that are different. No, it's not even that. It's differences in their little tiny fruits and a few other things. Incredibly hard fruit. And this all started again with Nellie Flynn. It was causing a lot of problems for me. Nellie Flynn in 1898 went up to Star Farm, right? Farm, then, in the north end of Burlington, right? And near the lake there collected this little Sagittarius. Now, this was her original label, handwritten, very nice, unlike my handwriting, which no one can read. And she identified as Sagittaria latifolia, forma obtusa, right? Very long name for basically this common arrowhead. Then Karl Rottaj, who's a Czech botanist, 1968, called it something else, right? And then Art Gilman, our favorite local botanist, in 2004, I wrote 2009 there, I see it's 2004, said possibly not Sagittarius latifolia. He wasn't even sure what it was. He just said maybe it's not that, right? Not that helpful. And then Arthur Haynes, who wrote the Flora of New England, in 2009 said Sagittaria engelmania, which is another species otherwise unknown from the coastal plain plant. Arthur Haynes, very good botanist, as is everyone else on this list. None of them agree, right? We think, right? Art Gilman finally came around and finally agreed with Arthur Haynes and said maybe this is Sagittaria engelmania. I'm not really sure, but question. That's where we've been since 2009, right? I'll leave that for a minute. I still love what this thing is. Aaron Marcus, who some folks may know here, collected another Sagittaria in 2020, the shores of the Winooski River. Two spots. One was at Salmon Hole again, so that spot where I pointed out that aster, just below there on an island, which Art brought me to this couple of weeks ago, and I swam out to the island to go look for this plant, which is not there because of the floods that we had. I kind of wiped them away. And then further down in the intervale, where we went and looked for the same plant again there, and I found like 4 plants that were this big. No, didn't have any fruit, so I couldn't identify them. And Aaron, very, very good botanist, was very careful and said, these are pretty weird. Took photos of the fruits, because I knew that the fruits are the kind of diagnostic characters here, and sent them to an expert in this group in Alabama. That person wrote back, Sagittaria australis, question mark, right? Partly he was unsure because this is a plant that's essentially an appellation. Right? Australis means southern. Right? This is not something that should be in Vermont. Right? No one's sure. Right? Still. And then just this year, Art Gilman, who is the top iNaturalist skeptic in the world, right? He said, some guy on iNaturalist says that this plant in this photo is Sagittaria bredi rostra. Another name I've never heard of before, which is an arrowhead from the Midwest. What are people doing there, right? And he said, it's not that. And he went out and collected and said, maybe it is, right? And then I went and got another one over in Richmond, right? Saw it there. This is definitely the same thing that Art had got in Essex, that this other guy had seen on iNaturalist. Don't really know what it is, right? Right? And we've shown this to multiple different folks who know these plants very well. None of us can figure out what any of these 3 things are, right? We know they're not Sagittaria latifolia, the common species, but we're not sure what they are. So is Sagittaria a hot spot right here in the Champlain Basin? Maybe. Maybe we do have 3 things that are otherwise only known from hundreds or thousands of miles away. I don't know. We're trying to figure this out right now. But the fun part here is that it ties together a century of Vermont botany, right? And that we have to rely on these historical collections. Sometimes from places that have been dramatically modified. Star Farm today is not what Star Farm was like in 1899 or 98, right? But if we do have 3 previously overlooked species of these things here, all just concentrated in the lower Winooski Valley, right? In the floodplains along the Winooski River. How do they get here? Someone might have the answer. Common name of Sagittarius, I found out, a while ago is duck potato. Turns out the ducks very much like to eat Sagittarius, and they're little tiny fruits can very easily get stuck on things. It's not that. That's my guess, right? Our wetlands in the Champlain Valley, amongst many other things, are important. I point out the snow geese earlier. We're part of a very important flag, right? Unlike most plants, animals move around a lot, right? And ducks and geese and coots and all sorts of other fun birds do it a lot and tend to eat plants along. That's my guess. I think we have three weird things here. I think they've all gotten here thanks to things like this black duck. That's not a mallard. Okay. It's a black duck that made a pit stop in Missouri and then flew up to Richmond. And here's the last one. I've probably already dramatically gone over time, but I'll wrap it up soon. Plant 3 is this thing that just has kind of a funny name, both the common name and the scientific. Florkia is the genus. Prosopinacoides. Florkia prosopinacoides. Say that 3 times fast. Commonly known as the false mermaid weed. I still do not know what a mermaid weed is, but this is a false one. And it's a really weird plant. It's a spring ephemeral. These are like your trilliums or your trout lilies, right? Or your hepaticas. These are these plants that flower very early in the spring, right? Before trees leaf out. And this is one that grows in floodplain forests. This is one that grows in wetlands along the edges of streams and rivers. It's kind of a wide range, but a very unusual distribution. And unlike trilliums and unlike trout lilies, unlike ramps, right? Florkia is an annual, right? It germinates, grows, it flowers, it fruits, and it dies one year. And it is visible above the ground, or well, it's alive basically for like 3 weeks. And it goes through its life cycle super fast. And it's also, I don't know how to characterize it, dinky. Right? It's just like a dinky little plant. It's really small, and it kind of just looks like your most generic plant possible. Right? This doesn't exactly stand out. This is not a Sagittarius. Like this big. Right? And there's little tiny white flowers that are about as big around as a pencil. Okay. And serve for 3 weeks. How are you ever going to find this? You're Nellie Flynn or Cyrus Pringle. That's how you find it, I guess. And it's one of Vermont's rarest, right? Historically. And it's kind of the ghost of the LaPlatte. This was collected by Cyrus Pringle. This is 1876. He wrote marshes and riverbanks, Shelburne, riverbanks, Shelburne, LaPlatte. Right? This is in the LaPlatte. Now there's other collections later. It says near river ledges, Shelburne. I basically dialed it into what's now the like LaPlatte Nature Park area. Some ledges there right near the river. The forest is the right type. I've gone there numerous times looking for this plant, can't find it. Right? Other people have gone and looked for it numerous times, couldn't find it. Right time of the year, it's not. It's an annual plant. These populations are probably ephemeral. It was last seen in the state in 1960. Gone. Right? So just like Woodwardia Bog or Woodwardia Pond, Florkia was here and it's gone. Right? Not quite, and it's back from the dead, in fact, or probably was just hiding the last century, pretty easy thing to overlook. And this is just such a fun story that I cannot pass up the opportunity to tell it. So it was found earlier this year, right? This thing flowers in like April, in Addison County by Molly Perrin, who's doing a wood turtle survey, right? So these are floodplain forests along streams. And anyone know wood turtles here? Very, very beautiful species of turtle. And this is on private land. This is a intact forest patch on someone's property. Right? These are not all just state parks and town parks. And she was looking for wood turtles. Decided to cross over to botany, but did not see the Florkia. She saw a very rare onion. Seriously, saw a very rare onion. Took a photo of the rare onion and sent the photo of the rare onion to Grace Clem, their state botany. He said, Grace, is this rare onion? This is like, I do not give a crap about the onion. What is that in the background? There's this little blurry plant in the background, which was the mermaid. The florkia was in the background, and that's it right there. I mean, how do you find this thing? Right? And so the lessons for the Little Mermaid weed, as far as I can see, is that the littlest finds can be the biggest discoveries, right? This is a little tiny plant, right? Look at all the news it's generated, right? It's a big deal. And I think it also highlights the importance of private lands in conservation, right? There's many lands are held by trusts or held by the state or held by municipalities, and that's really important. But there's lots of land held by private landowners. And I think many of those folks are allies in this process. And I think it also just highlights the importance of never stopping to look for this, right? And maybe taking some time to look for a wood turtle and finding an onion and then stumbling across the mermaid weed. And so just to kind of wrap up here, I spent a lot of time talking about plants rather than wetlands, but they're plants that live in wetlands. And I think it's important to keep in mind that wetlands are diverse, right? And I would say that wetlands are largely shaped by the plants that are present. There's always more to learn. There's so much going on in here that we know very little. I was talking with Dave Barrington, who you mentioned before, fern expert, but he knows a lot about flowering plants as well. And Art Gilman was in the office who wrote the flora of the lawn. So I had two experts with me, and I said to them, as I was putting this talk together, what kind of fruit is the water chestnut? It's that spiky thing. I said, but like, how do you classify that? They both immediately gave me answers. Neither of them said the same thing. They said two completely different things. And they accused the other one of being wrong, and then admitted that no one knew. Now, this is a major invasive species. And the more we thought about it, it's really hard to characterize just what kind of fruit does this thing have, right? There's so much to learn. Right, wetlands are fragile, and we do know that small inputs can have pretty drastic outcomes. And cooperation is key to success, right? The cooperation between individuals, between municipalities, states, governments, NGOs is critical for protecting these. We've also, I think, proven to be remarkably resilient in many ways. Right? It's never too late to. Right? Would it have been nice to get water chestnut out of Lake Champlain in 1970? Yes. Can we still do it? Yes, I think we can. We've made really remarkable progress in recent years in pushing it back. But sooner, of course, is always better than later, right, when it comes to these things. And the last thing to keep in mind is wetlands are really dynamic places, right? They're constantly changing. Now, a lot of the changes are being pushed on by us, and many of them are not good, but not all changes are bad, right? If you ever look at a river system through time and look at maps of how rivers change their course through time, it's very evident that wetlands change. And that's part of the natural flow. So might not be fun to see your favorite bog close in, but that's how it works. That's pretty much everything I have, folks. I'd like to thank everybody. Sarah did a great job doing it for me, so I don't have to do too much, but UVM's OVPR, the Echo Center, for supporting this, all of our different partners at UVM, Josh, Sarah, Sonia, Art, for all the help. And lots of people who provided photos here, and all of you for coming. And then I'll just leave this up here in the end, right? We have a nature walk on the 19th at Karst. Wetlands, natural area, it's UVM's newest natural area, really interesting site. Home to at least one, no, two, very rare sedges. So if you're looking for rare wetland plants, it's a good place to go. And then next month, again, November 12th, lecture, and then a visit to the ecosystem science lab right over here on the 16th. That's all I've got. Sorry for taking up so much time. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Wes, you're actually perfect on time.
Great, that's a
A few minutes
first.
for questions.
Yes.
I'm interested in, your commentary about cooperation on private lands. Where I live, there are 3 private ponds, and I have watched the diverse nature of the ponds change with wetlands growing, mostly growing.
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether it's good or bad. I'm not sure whether it's due to the Department of Transportation, that
Sure.
building farther away for the beavers, or
Sure.
I don't know exactly what's going on.
Could be beavers.
There's some way, I've looked on the state's website, and they don't have any kind of link or connection for people who have private lands.
Yeah.
So how do we find out if this is, if these 3 ponds go to a waterfall that goes straight into the lake?
Mhm.
And I think we might have some of those species that are invasive that need to be removed, but I have no expertise.
Sure. Are these like on your property you're saying, or these? If you want to get in touch, I'd be glad to go take, what part of the state is it?
It's in Colchester,
Okay, cool. Yeah, be glad to go take a look sometime.
really,
Yeah, sure.
thank you.
Maybe that arrow leaf will be. Yeah, yeah,
Thank you so much.
sure.
If you've seen the Japanese knotweed,
Yes.
is there a mitigation program that the state is doing, or is it not?
Yeah, there's a variety of initiatives there. Man, it's a really hard plant to deal with, I think. There's a lot of activity going on, and maybe some folks that are associated with the Field Naturalist program at UVM would know more. In the Mad River Valley, which is, really one of the most hard hit areas by this particular plant, which really lines the entire river and basically all of its tributaries. There's a variety of efforts going on there to mitigate it, where people are trying out both monitoring and different mitigation approaches. I don't know that much about it, but I think if you look up knotweed, Mad River Valley, that might be a step in the right direction.
We bought 4 acres that is the wetland.
Yeah.
We have a house that's built on a rock ledge in it. And one of our concerns when we just bought it was mosquitoes.
Sure.
And we have almost no mosquitoes. It's a very active wetland.
Yeah.
I mean, there's lots of minnows and frogs.
Sure.
And those,
Flycatchers.
I said, what's going on?
I don't know. It's hard to say.
Because everybody, said, oh, you have all those mosquitoes. I
Sure.
said, no.
Well, lucky you. I've also had the experience, many times it varies for me year to year and in different habitats, and especially depending on rainfall patterns. I've had kind of last couple of years have been either really wet or really dry, and maybe it's kind of those unusual precipitation.
It's almost
patterns.
like the Everglades where it's moving all the time.
Well, if it's flowing a lot, yes, that might be the answer there, is if you have enough flow going on there, it might not be optimal habitat for mosquito larvae.
I'm curious about the fundamental distinction between the Champlain Valley watershed and the basin. Is that?
The watershed.
They're the same.
Yep.
And when we were talking to you then about being up in Adamant, is that part of that basin? Is it that far away?
I have to go, yeah, I think it does, yeah, it'll be it'll go up to over near Cabot, a little bit over towards basically Danville almost, it would all drain in here, and it's really only the last little bit over, almost all the way to St. John's where it drains from our side of the state. So yeah, the watershed is tremendous.
But in proportion to Lake Champlain, that's the watershed that is so huge relative to what is draining. As I understand it, that's one of the reasons why so many nutrients drain.
Yeah, I mean, there's a very, very long course that's been drained down into Lake Champlain, all the way from
And it's that gigantic.
almost across 5.2 million acres.
That's the same thing, watershed basin.
In this case.
You have any plants similar like the false mermaid weed, like things that we've seen in Vermont a long time ago?
Oh, there's
You
so-
think,
there's
maybe it's
so
out there
many.
somewhere maybe off on
Yeah, there's
the
an orchid a plectrum hyemale that I saw once. I swear, I didn't realize it was rare in Vermont at the time. I saw it at Red Rocks Park. That sounds like you saw Sasquatch in Red Rocks Park. I don't know. But like, I saw it in Red Rocks Park. It makes sense that it would grow there 10 years ago. And I have not seen it since. I've gone back and looked for it since. It's not there. It had been found at Snake Mountain a few times. I think that's still around. There's a number of ones up on either Mount Mansfield or on Camel's Hump. There's a crowberry, and we had a story very similar to what happened. That very similar to what happened with the Florkia up on Mount Mansfield that was rediscovered after a similarly long amount of time. There's a relative of rhubarb that's way up on top of Camel's Hump and Mount Mansfield, or was at least. That's thought to be gone. I'd love to find it. But yeah, there's a long list. It's fun. Like, well,
Do you take a photo of
Sure.
it? So you just have your.
I do have a photo of it, and I've shown the photo. It's real, I promise. Very suspicious.
Well, you're like, I didn't handle my.
It's totally true. Yeah.
Questions? All right, well, thank you so much.
All right, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming.
Oh my God, what a blast. I have water aerobics, so I have